My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been locked up in Blackstone Federal Penitentiary for 7 years now. 7 long years that have taught me things about darkness that no man should ever learn. Before I tell you what happened last month in Cell Block D, let me ask you something. Do you believe that some places can hold on to evil? That concrete and steel can somehow absorb the wickedness that happens within them? Because after what I've witnessed, I know they can. I wasn't always a believer in the supernatural. When I first arrived at Blackstone serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery, I laughed at the old-timers who whispered about the things that happened after lights out. The guards who refused to patrol certain corridors alone. The inmates who would rather spend a month in solitary than be assigned to specific cells. I thought they were just trying to scare the new fish. How wrong I was. Blackstone isn't like other prisons. Built in 1892 on what used to be Native American burial grounds, this place has a history darker than any cell within its walls. Over the decades, it's housed the worst of humanity, and somehow all that malevolence has seeped into the very foundation of this place. Have you ever felt watched when you knew you were alone? That crawling sensation on the back of your neck that makes every hair stand on end? That's what Cell Block D feels like 24 hours a day. Even the toughest inmates avoid it when they can. The administration claims it's just superstition, but they rotate the guards assigned there every 2 weeks. Nobody can handle Block D for longer than that without starting to crack. My story begins on a Thursday night in October. The air vents had been acting up all week, making these sounds that weren't quite mechanical, more like breathing, slow, labored breathing that echoed through the pipes. My cellmate, Rodriguez, had put in for a transfer 3 days prior. He wouldn't tell me why, just kept muttering about the whispers and refusing to sleep. Then Rodriguez was moved to the infirmary after what the guards called a panic episode. I saw him as they carried him out. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated like he'd seen something that had broken his mind. He kept repeating the same phrase. "They're coming through the walls." The guard said he'd scratched his arms raw, claiming something was crawling under his skin. They sedated him and transferred him to the psychiatric ward upstate. That first night alone in my cell was when things started to change. The breathing in the vents got louder after lights out. At first, I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just the old building settling. But around 2 in the morning, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My name, whispered so softly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. Marcus, Marcus. Coming from inside the walls themselves, I sat up in my bunk, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heart. The whispers continued, sometimes from the left wall, sometimes from behind the toilet, sometimes from the ceiling itself. And they weren't just saying my name anymore. They were telling me things about my past that nobody in Blackstone could know. Details about my childhood, about the night I committed my crime, about regrets I'd never spoken aloud to anyone. Do you know what it's like to question your own sanity? To wonder if the isolation has finally pushed you over the edge? That's what I told myself for the first 3 nights. Just stress, just my mind playing tricks. But on the 4th night, something happened that proved I wasn't imagining any of it. I woke up to find my cell door standing open, not unlocked. Open, wide open, like someone had casually swung it outward and walked away. In 7 years, I'd never seen a malfunction like that. These doors are controlled electronically from the guard station with multiple backup systems. They don't just open on their own. Now, let me tell you something about prison. An open door, when it shouldn't be open, isn't freedom. It's a trap. I should have called for a guard immediately, should have stayed in my bunk. But the whispers were louder now, more insistent, and they were coming from the corridor. They were calling me to cell 4119. Cell 419 had been empty for as long as I'd been in Blackstone. Not officially empty. The records showed it as occupied by an inmate named William Ashford. But I'd never seen anyone go in or out, never seen food delivered there, never heard a sound from within. The old-timers said Ashford had been there since the 70s, but that was impossible. My feet moved without my conscious decision. The corridor was darker than it should have been, half the lights flickering or completely dead. The security cameras that normally swept back and forth hung motionless, their red recording lights extinguished. It was like the entire block had been abandoned. Have you ever walked through a place that felt fundamentally wrong, where the air itself seems thick and hostile? That's what that corridor felt like. The concrete floor was ice cold under my bare feet, and I could see my breath misting in front of me, though the prison is usually kept at 70 degrees. The whispers grew louder with each step, overlapping voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. When I reached cell 419, the door was already open. Inside, the darkness was absolute, seeming to swallow the weak light from the corridor. I stood at the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to run back to my cell. But something compelled me forward, not curiosity, but a pull I couldn't resist, like invisible hands dragging me into that black void. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me. The darkness was suffocating, pressing against me from all sides. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I wasn't alone in that cell. I could feel a presence, ancient and malevolent, circling me like a predator sizing up its prey. Then the walls began to glow, not with light, but with something else. A phosphorescent shimmer that revealed things that shouldn't exist. The concrete was covered in scratches, thousands upon thousands of tally marks, carved so deep they looked fresh. And in the center of the back wall, a message written in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. They feed on despair. They grow stronger with fear. They never let you go. The presence in the cell pressed closer, and I felt a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of the void, of places human warmth had never touched. And then it spoke, not in whispers, but in a voice that seemed to come from inside my own skull. "You want to know what happened to Ashford?" it said, and though I couldn't see anything, I could feel it smile. "He's still here. He's always been here, just like Rodriguez will be, just like you will be if you don't understand the rules." The walls began to shift and ripple like liquid, and in their surface I saw faces. Dozens of faces, all twisted in silent screams, pressing against the concrete from the inside like they were trying to claw their way out. Some I recognized, inmates who had supposedly been transferred, guards who had quit without notice. Rodriguez's terrified features were among them. "This place is hungry," the voice continued. "It's been hungry for over a century, feeding on the misery and violence that soaks into its bones. But sometimes misery isn't enough. Sometimes it needs to consume completely." I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but my voice wouldn't come. The faces in the walls pressed harder, their mouths moving in desperate attempts to warn me, but no sound escaped their concrete prison. "You have a choice," the presence said. "Feed it, or become part of it. Bring it others, or become another face in the walls. The guards know. Why do you think they rotate so quickly? Why do you think certain cells stay empty? The phosphorescent glow began to pulse, and with each pulse, I saw more. I saw the history of Blackstone playing out in the walls like a demented movie. Riots where inmates tore each other apart with inhuman strength. Guards who went mad and turned on their colleagues. Prisoners who simply vanished from locked cells. William Ashford made his choice in 1973, the voice whispered. He feeds it still, brings it the weak, the isolated, the ones who won't be missed immediately. In exchange, he exists between states, neither alive nor consumed, neither free nor imprisoned, a servant to the hunger that lives in these walls. Suddenly, the darkness lifted, and I found myself face to face with what had once been a man. Ashford stood before me, but he was wrong in every possible way. His skin was pale as concrete, with veins that pulsed with that same phosphorescent glow. His eyes were black pits that seemed to extend infinitely inward, and when he smiled, his teeth were far too numerous and far too sharp. "You're strong," Ashford said, his voice layered with harmonics that shouldn't come from a human throat. "You've survived 7 years here without breaking. That makes you useful. The hunger respects strength. Help me satisfy it, and you'll never have to fear the walls. Refuse, and well..." He gestured to the faces trapped in the concrete, their silent screams eternal. "Have you ever had to make a choice that would damn you either way? Stand at a crossroads where every path leads through hell? That's where I stood in that moment, in a cell that shouldn't exist, talking to a thing that used to be human, surrounded by souls trapped in living concrete. "I need time," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "Time to think." Ashford's laugh was like grinding stone. "Time is all we have here, but not too long. The hunger grows impatient, and when it's impatient, it takes whoever is closest. Your neighbor in 321 looks particularly vulnerable. Jenkins, isn't it? First offense, weak constitution." The door to cell 419 swung open, and I stumbled out into the corridor. The lights were working again, the cameras sweeping normally. When I looked back, the door was closed, looking exactly like every other cell door in the block, if not for the cold sweat soaking my clothes and the lingering chill in my bones. I might have thought I'd dreamed it all. I made it back to my cell just as the morning count began. The guards noted nothing unusual, my door locked and secure. But I knew the truth. I'd been given a glimpse behind the veil, shown the real nature of Blackstone Penitentiary. And now I had to decide, become a monster to avoid being consumed by one, or maintain my humanity and risk ending up as another face in the walls. Over the next few days, I watched Jenkins in 321. He was young, maybe 22, in for fraud, not cut out for prison life. He flinched at every loud noise, kept his head down, tried to make himself invisible, the perfect prey for whatever fed on the misery of this place. I saw how the shadows seemed to linger longer in his doorway, how other inmates unconsciously avoided him. On the 5th night after my encounter with Ashford, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't calling me. They were calling Jenkins. I heard him whimpering through the walls, begging them to stop. I pressed my ear to the concrete and heard Ashford's voice, smooth and persuasive, telling Jenkins about being chosen. "Do you judge me for what I did next?" I could have warned Jenkins, could have told him to resist, to call for the guards. But I remembered the faces in the walls, the eternal torment of those who had been consumed. and I remembered that it could just as easily be me. So I did nothing. I lay in my bunk and listened as Jenkins' whimpers turned to sobs, then to silence. The next morning, his cell was empty. The official report said he'd been transferred due to good behavior, but I knew better. I'd seen his face that morning, pressed against my wall for just a moment, his mouth open in a silent scream before sinking back into the concrete. That night, Ashford visited me again, not in cell 419, but in my own cell, materializing from the shadows. "You made the right choice," he said. "The hunger is satisfied for now. It will sleep for a few weeks, maybe a month, but it will wake again, and when it does, it will need more." He taught me the signs to watch for, the way the air grows thick before the hunger wakes, the particular pattern of flickering lights, the subtle change in the ventilation that means it's listening for the weakest heartbeat, the most fragile mind. "The guards know," Ashford explained. "The warden knows. They've known for decades. But what can they do? Tear down the prison? They maintain the status quo. They transfer out anyone who gets too close to the truth, and they let creatures like us handle the dirty work." Creatures like us, that's what I'd become. Not quite human anymore, not quite consumed, but something in between. I could feel the change in me, a coldness that never quite went away, an ability to see things that should have remained hidden. I could see the threads of despair that connected certain inmates to the hunger. I could hear the whispers constantly now. Weeks passed, then months. Each time the hunger woke, Ashford and I would identify the weakest, the most isolated, the ones whose disappearance would raise the fewest questions. Sometimes the whispers would call them on their own. Sometimes we had to be more active, spreading rumors, increasing isolation, making sure the selected victim was properly seasoned with fear before the feeding. Have you ever done something terrible to survive? Every face that appeared in the walls was my responsibility. Every soul trapped in concrete was there because I chose my own survival over their freedom. But what was the alternative? Join them. The worst part was how easy it became, how natural it felt to identify weakness, to manipulate and isolate. I told myself I was choosing the inevitable victims, the ones who wouldn't survive prison anyway. But late at night, when the walls pulsed with phosphorescent light and the faces stared at me with accusation, I knew I was lying to myself. There was one inmate, Thomas, who figured out something was wrong. He was smart, observant. He started keeping track of the disappearances, the transfers that didn't add up. He asked questions, talked to the old-timers, even tried to get word to journalists. Ashford wanted to feed him to the hunger immediately, but I convinced him to wait. Thomas was well-connected, had family who visited regularly. We needed to discredit him first. So I befriended him, gained his trust, listened to his theories with fake skepticism that gradually turned to fake belief, and slowly, carefully, I poisoned his mind. I confirmed his wildest theories, encouraged him to act on his paranoia. Within a month, Thomas was ranting about monsters to anyone who would listen. The guards documented his deteriorating mental state. When Thomas finally disappeared into cell 419, nobody questioned the transfer to a psychiatric facility. But I knew the truth. I'd led him there, step by step. I'd taken a sane man and driven him mad, then fed him to a hunger that should never have existed. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've helped feed dozens to the thing in the walls. Each time it gets easier. Each time I feel less human. The prison psychologist says I'm showing remarkable adaptation. If only he knew my coping mechanism was becoming a monster myself. But something's changed recently. The hunger is growing stronger, needier. What used to satisfy it for weeks now barely lasts days. Ashford is worried. He says this has happened before, cycles where the entity needs more until it finally gorges itself in an event written off as a riot. The last time was in 1987, he told me. 37 inmates gone in a single night. The official report blamed contaminated drugs. But I was there. I saw the walls open up like mouths. I saw entire cell blocks swallowed. He showed me the scars, lines of phosphorescent glow running under his skin. Each feeding makes us less human, he said. Eventually, we become part of it completely. Not trapped like the ones in the walls, but dissolved into the hunger itself. That's the real price of survival here. I've started seeing changes in myself too. My reflection sometimes takes a second too long to match my movements. My shadow falls in directions that don't match the light. And sometimes I can feel the thoughts of the faces in the walls, their endless screaming from unbearable awareness. The question that haunts me, how long before I'm more monster than man? And the scariest part is, I'm not sure I care anymore. The humanity I'm trying to preserve feels like a distant memory. Last week, a new inmate arrived in Block D young, scared, perfect for the hunger. But something about him reminded me of who I was before. Maybe it was his defiance despite his fear. For the first time in months, I felt guilt. I tried to warn him subtly, told him to avoid certain areas, to never investigate strange sounds. But Ashford noticed. "You're going soft," he said. "Remember what happens to those who don't serve their purpose." The young inmate, David, didn't listen anyway. Last night, I heard him following whispers that promised answers. I could have stopped him, should have stopped him, but I didn't, because stopping him would have meant taking his place. This morning, David's cell was empty, and there was a new face in the shower room wall. His eyes seemed to follow me, accusing, pleading. But there's nothing I can do for him now. He's part of the structure, part of Blackstone. You want to know the real horror? It's not the thing that feeds on despair. It's the slow realization that survival here means becoming the very evil you once feared. It's the gradual acceptance that this is normal. It's the moment you stop seeing the faces as victims and start seeing them as necessary sacrifices. I've been here 7 years, but it feels like 70. The man who entered Blackstone for armed robbery is gone. In his place is something that looks like Marcus Thompson, but isn't quite Marcus Thompson anymore. Sometimes I wonder, what would happen if I refused to continue? If I rejected the hunger, chose to face whatever consequences came? But then, I remember Rodriguez's eyes, I remember Jenkins's face sinking into my wall, and I know I'm too far gone to turn back. The hunger is stirring again. I can feel it in the walls. Ashford says something big is coming. He's been preparing, marking certain inmates, ensuring that when the feeding frenzy begins, we're not among the consumed. But I've been thinking, what if the hunger can never truly be satisfied? What if we're just delaying the inevitable? What if everyone in Blackstone is already marked and we're just determining the order? These thoughts keep me awake, staring at the ceiling where sometimes I can see them moving. The ones who were consumed, reaching through dimensions of concrete, trying to warn us or damn us or simply make contact. Have you ever wondered what happens to a place soaked in enough suffering? Blackstone is the answer. It becomes something else, something hungry and aware. And those of us inside aren't inmates anymore. We're parts of a vast organism that feeds on human misery. The new inmates don't understand. They think the danger comes from other prisoners. They don't realize that the walls themselves are the predator, that the structure is a living thing with an insatiable appetite. I should end this soon. The lights are flickering in that particular pattern. Someone in Block D is about to be chosen, and I need to make sure it's not me. But before I go, let me leave you with this. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, that makes your instincts scream warnings, listen to those instincts. Run, because some prisons aren't made of bars and concrete. Some prisons are living things, and once you're inside them, you become part of them forever. Sometimes late at night, I think about the man I used to be, the Marcus Thompson who walked into Blackstone 7 years ago, convinced he could do his time unchanged. That version of me is as dead as the souls in these walls. I've become something else, something that serves the darkness. And the terrifying part, it feels natural. The transition from victim to accomplice happened so gradually, I can't pinpoint when I stopped being human. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been in Blackstone for 7 years. But I'll be here forever, one way or another, either as a servant or as a face in the wall, or dissolved into this place's consciousness. There is no release date. There is no parole. Only the hunger, and those who feed it, and those who are fed to it. The whispers are getting louder now. They're calling a name, but it's not mine. Not tonight. Someone else will disappear before morning, and there will be a new face in the walls. And I'll pretend not to notice, just like everyone else, because acknowledging it makes you a target. But I need to tell you something else before I close this. Last week I found an old newspaper from 1891 in the prison library. It described a survey that found strange mineral deposits deep underground. The surveyor, Dr. Herbert Crane, went mad within weeks. His journal described the rocks being alive, whispering to him in his dreams, showing him vast networks of living stone beneath the surface. He drew detailed maps that match Blackstone's foundation perfectly. This hunger was here before the prison. Someone deliberately built this facility on top of an entity that feeds on human suffering. They created a perfect symbiotic relationship. The prison provides the food. The entity provides the means of disposal. I've wondered how many other institutions sit atop similar sites. How many hospitals, asylums, prisons are built on things that should have stayed buried. But these are questions for people outside, people who still have freedom. In here, choice is an illusion. We're all part of the organism now. Every breath, every step, every word feeds it. The rehabilitation programs, work details, education, they're all just ways to generate different emotions for consumption. Hope-crushed tastes different from existing despair. Fear of the unknown differs from fear of the familiar. We're not being rehabilitated. We're being seasoned. Do you understand now? Do you see why some stories should never be told? But I had to tell someone, had to confess what I've become. Because maybe someone will read this and understand that there are worse things than prison, worse things than any punishment the law can devise. Those things live in the walls of Blackstone Federal Penitentiary, and they're always hungry,